Hi everyone. So today I'm doing a video on the Exilarch, and this is not a very familiar term that people are really aware of. There's very little information out there about them on the internet, and I feel that although I've talked quite a lot about them in my last few videos, that we really need an explanation of who they are. So according to Wikipedia, this is basically just the exoteric version of who the Exilarch are. It says the Exilarch was the leader of the Jewish community in Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq, during the era of the Parthians, Sassanians, and the Abbasid Caliphate, up until the Mongol invasion of Baghdad in 1258. With intermittent gaps due to ongoing political developments, the Exilarch was regarded by the Jewish community as the royal heir to the house of David, and held a place of prominence as both a rabbinical authority and a noble within the Persian and Arab court. So this is really important because here they are the royal line of the house of David, of the exiled tribe of Judah, when Babylon took them into captivity, and they were the authority of the rabbis, and they're the authority of the noble house of Judah, or King David. So anything or anybody with the symbols of King David on them are related to this Exilarch group. Within the Sasanian Empire, the Exilarch was the political equivalent of the Catholicos. So that means a Catholicos is the head of certain churches or in some Eastern Christian traditions. The title implies autocephaly, and in some cases it is the title of the head of an autonomous church. The word comes from the ancient Greek, derived from Cthulhu, generally kata, meaning concerning the whole universal general. It originally designated a financial or civil office in the Roman Empire. So basically what they're saying here is that the Exilarch, or the head of the exiled tribe of Judah in Babylon, is the head of all of Judah. So it's within the Sasanian Empire, the Exilarch was the political equivalent of the Catholicos of the Christian Church of the East, and was thus responsible for community-specific organizational tasks such as running the rabbinical courts, collecting taxes from Jewish communities, supervising and providing finance for the Talmudic academies in Babylonia, and the charitable redistribution and financial assistance to needy members of the exile community. The position of the Exilarch was hereditary, held in continuity by a family that traced its patrilineal descent from antiquity, stemming from King David himself. I'll go into the scripture after I finish reading this of who the Exilarch were from the Bible. The first historical documents referring to it date from the time when Babylonia was part of the late Parthian Empire. The office first appears during the 2nd century and continues to the middle of the 6th century under different Persian dynasties, the Parthians and the Sassanids. In late 5th and early 6th centuries, Mar-Zutra II briefly formed a politically independent state where he ruled from Mahosa for about 7 years. He was eventually defeated by Kavada I, king of Persia, and the office of the Exilarch was diminished for some time thereafter. The position was restored to prominence in the 7th century under the rule of Arab Caliphate, and the office of Exilarch continued to be appointed by Arab authorities through the 11th century. The Exilarch's authority came under considerable challenge in 825 during the reign of Al-Mamun, who issued a decree permitting a group of 10 men from any religious community to organize separately, which allowed the Gaon of the Talmudic academies of Surah and Pumbedita to compete with the Exilarch for power and influence, later contributing to the wider schism between the Karaites and the rabbinic jury. So the word Exilarch in Greco-Latin Kalku for the Hebrew Rosh HaGolah, literally meaning head of the exile. The position was similarly called in Aramaic Reish Galuta or Resh Galvata, the Arabic Ras al Galut. It was translated into Persian as the Jewish people in exile were referred to as Gola or Galut. The contemporary Greek term that was used was literally meaning the leader of the captives. This Greek term has continued to be applied to the office, notwithstanding changes to the position over time, which were largely titular. Although there is no mention of the office before the 2nd century, the Seder Olam Zuta alleges that the office of Exilarch was established following the deportation of King Jeconiah and his court into exile in Babylon, after the first fall of Jerusalem in 597 BC, and augmented after the further deportations following destruction of the Kingdom of Judah in 587. The history of the Babylonian exilate falls into two separate identifiable periods before and after the beginning of the Arabic rule of Babylonia. Nothing is known about the office before the 2nd century when it is first referenced in the Talmud, including any details about its origins. It can merely be said in general that the Gola diaspora, the Jews living in compact masses in various parts of Babylon, tended gradually to unite and create an organization, and that this tendency, together with the high regard in which the descendants of the house of David living in Babylon were held, brought it about that a member of the house was recognized as the head of the Gola. The dignity became hereditary in this house and was finally recognized by the state, and hence became an established political institution, first of the Arsasid Empire and then the Sassanid. Such was the exilate as it appears in the Talmudic literature, the chief source for its history during the first period, and which provides our only information regarding the rights and functions of the exilate. For the second Arabic period, there is very important and trustworthy description of the institution of the exilate. And it says, see the sections installation, ceremonies, and income and privileges. This description is also important for the first period, as many of the details may be regarded as having persisted from it. In Baghdad, the privilege of using seals was limited to the Exilarch and the Geonim, serving under the authority of the Caliph. They were extremely powerful as the highest authority of the Jewish people in the Caliphate. The use of seals was not limited to internal matters. Their authority was recognized by the Muslims as well, based on the accounts of Benjamin of Toledo. At the head of them all, the Jews under the Baghdad Caliphate, is Daniel the son of Hasdai, who is styled our Lord, the head of the captivity of all Israel. He has been invested with authority over the congregations of Israel at the hands of Emir al-Mu'minin, the Lord of Islam. The following are exilarchs mentioned in the Seder Olam Zuta. Most are likely legendary figures and have parallels in the text of 1 Chronicles 3. So it started with Jeconiah, last of the Davidic kings of Judah. And through his lineage, we have these rabbinic exilarchs under the Sassanids. So I won't read the list out here, it'll take forever, but this particular exilarch here, Bostonai, is an important one in history. So the following is a list of Karaite exilarchs beginning in the 8th century after the end of the tenure of the exilarch David I. So David ben Judah Messer Leon was an Italian rabbi, physician, and writer who defended the value of secular disciplines and the Renaissance humanities as an important part of traditional Jewish studies. The Karaite Judaism, or Charism, is a non-rabbinical Jewish sect characterized by the recognition of the written Tanakh alone as the supreme authority of the halakha and theology. Karaites believe that all of the divine commandments which were handed down to Moses by God were recorded in writing. legendary origins, the Sedar Olam Zuta states that the first Exilarch was Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, who was carried off to captivity in Babylonia in 597 BC, wherein he established his residence at the city of Nehardea in Babylonia. The Chronicles, written 800 AD, presents the legendary origin of the early history of the house of the Babylonian Exilarch. The captive king's advancement at evil Mordecai's court, with which the narrative of the second book of Kings closes, was regarded by the author of the Sedar Olam Zuta as the origin of the office and the basis for the Exilarch's authority. So 2 Kings 24-25, in his days Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans and bands of Syrians and bands of Moabites and bands of Ammonites, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servants the prophets. Surely this came upon Judah at the command of the Lord, to remove them out of his sight, for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood that he had shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not pardon. Now the rest of the deeds of Jehoiakim and all that he did are not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiakim his son reigned in his place. And the king of Egypt did not come out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. And Jehoiakim the king of Judah gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants and his officials and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign, and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon king of Israel had made, as the Lord had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon. The king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the chief men of the land he took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the metal workers, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, and daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon, and in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month of the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it, and they built siege works all around it. So the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate between the two walls by the king's garden, and the Chaldeans were around the city. And they went in the direction of Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. And all his army was scattered from him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in chains, and took him to Babylon. In the 5th year, on the 7th day of the month, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem, and the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. And the pillars of bronze that were in the house of the Lord, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and carried the bronze to Babylon. And they took away the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the dishes for incense, and all the vessels of bronze used in the temple service, the fire pans also, and the bowls. What was of gold the captain of the guard took away as gold, and what was of silver as silver. For the 2 pillars, the one sea, and the stand that Solomon had made for the house of the Lord, the bronze of all the vessels was beyond weight. The weight of one pillar was 18 cubits, and on it was a capital of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits. The lattice work and the pomegranates of all the bronze were all around the capital, and the second pillar had the same with the lattice work. And the captain of the guard took Seraiah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and 3 keepers of the threshold. And from the city he took an officer who had been in command of the men of war, and 5 men of the king's council who were found in the city, and the secretary of the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. And the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was taken into exile out of its land. And over the people who remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had left, he appointed Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, governor. Now when all the captains of and their men heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah governor, they came with their men to Gedaliah at Mizpah, namely Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Seraiah the son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite, and Jezaniah the son of Maccathite. And Gedaliah swore to them and their men, saying, "Do not be afraid because of the Chaldeans' officials. Live in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you." But in the 7th month, Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, son of Elishama, of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck down Gedaliah and put him to death, along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. Then all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the force arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, evil Merodach king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign graciously, freed Jehoiakim king of Judah from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table, and for his allowance a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs as long as he lived. Now it says here that basically these kings took all of these skilled workers away with them to Babylon, and over time these skilled workers learnt to trade and they became merchants and bankers and lawyers for the kings of Babylon. They also think it's really important to note here that all of these kings were considered evil and God removed them from his sight or presence. A list of generations of the descendants of the king is given in the text, which closely parallels the names found in First Chronicles. A commentary of the Chronicles dating from the school of Sadiah Gaon quotes Judah ibn Quraysh to the effect that the genealogical list of the descendants of David was added to the book at the end of the period of the Second Temple, a view which was shared by the author of the list of Babylonian exilarchs in Sedar Olam Zuta. This list attempts to bridge the 700-year gap between Jehoiakim and the first exilarch mentioned in written sources, Nahum. It grants some specific hallmarks chronologically connecting personalities with the history of the Second Temple, such as Shechaniah, who is mentioned as having lived at the time of the temple's destruction. The following are enumerated as his predecessors in office: Salathiel, Zerubbabel, Meshullam, Hananiah, Berechiah, Hasadiah, Josiah, Obadiah, and Shemaiah, Shechaniah, and Hezekiah. All of these names are also found in First Chronicles 3. Albeit to the confabulated order, this list cannot be historical given the limited number of generations presented. The name Achab is also found at the end of the Davidic list of the Sedar Olam Zuta, which is followed by Nahum, with whom the historic portion of the list begins, and who may be roughly assigned to the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in 135. This is the period in which the first allusions in the rabbinical literature are found to the office of Exilarch. The first allusions in the Jerusalem Talmud, in the account referring to the attempt of a teacher of the law from the land of Israel, Hananiah, nephew of Josiah ben Hananiah, to render the Babylonian Jew independent of the Sanhedrin, the religious and political authority residing in the land of Judea. A man named Ahijah is mentioned as the temporal head of the Babylonian Jews, possibly one of the first historic exilarchs. Another rabbinical source substitutes the name Nehuyan for Ahijah. It is likely that Nehuyan is identical with the Nahum mentioned in the list. The political danger threatening the Sanhedrin eventually passed. At about the same time, Rabbi Nathan, a member of the house of Exilarch, came to Galilee, where the Sanhedrin met and where the Nasai resides following the Jewish expulsion from Jerusalem. By virtue of his rabbinical scholarship, he was soon classed among the foremost Tanaim of the post of Hadrianic epoch. His supposed Davidic genealogical origins suggested to Rabbi Meir that the plan of making the Babylonian scholar Nasai prince in place of the Hillite Simon ben Gamaliel. However, the conspiracy against the reigning Nasai failed. Rabbi Nathan was subsequently among the confidants of the Hillite patriarchal house and the teacher of Simon ben Gamaliel's son Judah I, also known as Judah ha-Nasai. Rabbi Meir's attempt, however, seems to have led Judah I to fear that Babylonian Exilarch might come to Judea to claim the office from Hillel the Elder's descendant. He discussed the subject with the Babylonian scholar Haya, a prominent member of his school, saying that he would pay due honor to the Exilarch should the later come, but that he would not renounce the office of Nasai in favor. When the body of the Exilarch Huna, who was the first incumbent of that office, explicitly mentioned as such in the Talmudic literature, was brought to Judea during the time of Judah I, Haya drew upon himself Judah's deep resentment by announcing the fact to him with words, "Huna is here," a Tanaitic exposition of Genesis 49:10, which contrasts the Babylonian exilarchs ruling by force with Hillel's descendants. Teaching in public evidently intends to cast a negative reflection on the former. However, Judah I had to listen to his own table, to the statement of the youth son of Haya above about the same Tanaitic exposition that the Messiah cannot appear until the exilate of Babylon and the patriarchate at Jerusalem shall have ceased. basically saying that the Messiah is still coming, that Jesus is not the Messiah. They are still looking for Messiah to come, even after, what's happened to Jerusalem. According to the Seder Olam Zuta, Naham was followed by his brother Johanan, both of whom are called the sons of Achab in the text. Johanan's son Shaphat is listed next, who was succeeded by Anan, his son. Given the chronological similarities, the identification of the Exilarch Anan with the Huna of the Talmud account is very likely. At the time of Anan's successor, Nathan Uqban I, according to the Seder Olam Zuta, occurred the fall of the Parthian Empire and the founding of the Sassanid dynasty in AD 226, which is noted as follows in the Seder Olam Zuta. In the year 166 after the destruction of the temple, the Persian Empire advanced upon the Romans. On the historical value of this statement, Nathan Uqban, also known as Mar Uqban, was the contemporary of Rav and Samuel, who also occupied a prominent position among the scholars of Babylon. And according to Sherira, Gaon was also Exilarch. As Uqban's successor, he's mentioned in the list his son Huna II, whose chief advisors were Rav, died 247, and Samuel, died 254, and in whose time Papa ben Nazor destroyed Neherada. Huna's son, the successor Nathan, whose chief advisors were Judah ben Ezekiel, died in 299, and Shesheth was called like his grandfather Mar Uqban, and it is he, the second Exilarch of his name, whose curious correspondence with Eleazar ben Pedat is referred to in the Talmud. He was succeeded by his brother, not his son, as stated in the Seder Olam Zuta. His leading advisor was Shezbi. The Exilarch Nehemiah is also mentioned in the Talmud. He is the same person as Rabbanu Nehemiah, and he is brother Rabbanu Uqban, Mar Uqban II, are several times mentioned in the Talmud as sons of Rab's daughter. Hence, Huna II was Rab's son-in-law and members of the house of the Exilarchs. So here it says, diminished power of the Babylonian Exilate. When Gaon Hai died in 1038, nearly a century after Sedia's death, the members of his academy could not find a more worthy successor than the Exilarch Hezekiah, a great-grandson of David ben Zakkai, who thereafter filled both offices. But 2 years later, in 1040, Hezekiah, who was last Exilarch and also the last Gaon, fell a victim to calumny by Apir. He was imprisoned and tortured to death. 2 of his sons fled to Spain, where they found refuge with Joseph, son and successor of Samuel ha-Nagid. Alternatively, Jewish Quarterly Review mentions that Hezekiah was liberated from prison and became head of the academy, and is mentioned as such by the contemporary in 1046. So I'm going to go into this. A lot of these exilarchs moved to Spain and became lords and dons, and we do have a really big Sephardi Jewish community in Spain and France, and there's a lot of history revolved around that and the exilarchs. A lot of that history ties into the Inquisition and the formation of the Protestant Church, and I honestly believe that may be linked to the Jesuits as well. So later traces, the title of Exilarch is found occasionally even after the Babylonian Exilarchate has ceased. Abraham ibn Ezra speaks of the Davidic house at Baghdad before 1140, calling its members the heads of the exile. Benjamin of Tulida, was also known as Benjamin ben Jonah, was a medieval Jewish traveller who visited Europe, Asia, and Africa in the 12th century. His vivid descriptions of Western Asia preceded those of Marco Polo by 100 years, with his broad education and vast knowledge. In 1170 mentions the Exilarch Hasdai, among whose pupils was the subsequent pseudo-messiah David Alroy, and Hasdai's son, the Exilarch Daniel. Pethahiah of Regensburg also refers to the later, but under the name of Daniel ben Solomon. Hence, it must be assumed that Hasdai was also called Solomon. Yehuda al-Harizi met at Mosul, a descendant of the house of David, whom he calls David, the head of the exile. A long time previously, a descendant of the ancient house of the Exilarchs had attempted to revive in Fatimid Egypt the dignity of Exilarch, which had become extinct in Babylon, was the David ben Daniel. He came to Egypt at the age of 20 in 1081 and was proclaimed Exilarch by the learned Jewish authorities of the country, who wished to divert to Egypt the leadership formerly enjoyed by Babylon. A contemporary document, the Megillah of the Gaon Abiathar from the land of Israel, gives an authentic account of the episode of the Egyptian Exilarchate, which ended with the downfall of David ben Daniel in 1094. Descendants of the house of Exilarchs were living in various places long after the office became extinct. A descendant of Hezekiah, Haya al-Dawdi, Gaon of Andalusia, died in 1154 in Castile. According to Abraham ibn Daud, several families as late as the 14th century traced their descendants back to Josiah, the brother of David ben Zakkai, whom had been banished to Khorasan. See the genealogies in the descendants of Karaite exilarchs have been referred to above. Relations with the academies. So, in accordance with the character of Talmudic traditions, it is the relation of the exilarchs to the heads of the members of the schools that is especially referred to in Talmudic literature. The Seder Olam Zuta, Chronicle of the Exilarchs, that is the most important and, in many cases, the only source of information concerning their succession, has also preserved chiefly the names of those scholars who had certain official relations with the respective exilarchs. The phrase used in the connection Hakamim Debarahu, the scholars directed him, is the stereotyped phrase used also in connection with the fictitious exilarchs of the century of the Second Temple. In the later case, however, it occurs without the specific mention of names, a fact in favor of the historicalness of those names that are given for the succeeding centuries. The authenticity of the names of the Amoraim. So Amoraim refers to Jewish scholars of the period from about 200 to 500 AD who said or told over the teachings of the oral Torah. They were primarily located in Babylonia and the land of Israel. Their legal discussions and debates were eventually codified in the Gemara. So designated as the scholars guiding the several exilarchs is the case of those passages in which the text is beyond dispute, supporting by eternal chronological evidence also. Some of the Babylonian Amoraim were closely related to the house of the Exilarchs, as, for example, Rabbah ben Abhua, whom Gaon Sherira, claiming Davidian descent, named as his ancestor. Naaman ben Jacob, died 320, also became closely connected with the house of the Exilarchs through his marriage with Rabbah ben Abhua's daughter, the proud Yaltha. And he owed to this connection perhaps his office of chief judge of the Babylonian Jews. Huna, the head of the school of Surah, recognized Naaman ben Jacob's superior knowledge of the law by saying that Naaman was very close to the gate of the Exilarch, where many cases were decided. The term Dayane de Baba, judges of the gate, which was applied in the post-Talmudic time to the members of the court of the Exilarch, is derived from the phrase just quoted. Two details of Naaman ben Jacob's life cast light on his position at the court of the Exilarch. He received the two scholars Rav Chisda and Rabbah B. Huna, who came to pay their respects to the Exilarch. And when the Exilarch was building a new house, he asked Naaman to take charge of the placing of mezuzah according to the law. The scholars who formed part of the retinue of the Exilarch were called scholars of the house of the Exilarch. A remark of Samuel, the head of the school of Nehadiah. So Nehadiah was the city from the area called by ancient Jewish sources Babylonia, shows that they wore certain badges on their garments to indicate their position. Once a woman came to Naaman ben Jacob complaining that the Exilarch and the scholars of his court sat at the festival in a stolen booth, the material for it having been taken from her. There are many anecdotes of the annoyances and indignities the scholars had to suffer at the hands of the Exilarch's servants, such as the case of Amoraim the Pious, or Haya of Parawa, and of Abba ben Mata. The modification of ritual requirements granted to the Exilarchs and their household in certain concrete cases is characteristic of their relation to the religious law. Once, when certain preparations which the Exilarch was making in his park for elevating the strictness of the Sabbath law were interrupted by Rabbah and his pupils, he exclaimed in the words of Jeremiah 4:22, "They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge." There are frequent references to the questions, partly halakhic and exegetical in nature, which the Exilarch laid before his scholars. Details are sometimes given of lectures that were delivered at the entrance of the house of the Exilarch. These lectures were probably delivered at the time of the assemblies which brought many representatives of Babylonian Judaism to the court of the Exilarch after the autumnal feast festivals. The luxurious banquets at the court of the Exilarch were well known. An old anecdote was repeated in the land of Israel concerning a splendid feast which the Exilarch once gave to the Tana Judah ben Bathra at Nisibis on the eve of Tisha B'Av. Though the more exact S. Buber's edition, the feast was given by the chief of the synagogue. Another story told in the land of Israel relates that an Exilarch had music in his house morning and evening, and that Mar Ukba, who subsequently became Exilarch, sent him as a warning this verse from Hosea: "Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy as other people." The Exilarch Nehemiah is said to have dressed entirely in silk. The Talmud says mostly nothing in regard to the personal relations of the Exilarchs to the royal court. One passage relates merely that Hunna ben Nathan appeared before Yazdegerd I, who with his own hands girded him with the belt which was the sign of the Exilarch's office. There are also two allusions dating from the earlier time, one by Haya, a Babylonian living in the land of Israel, and the other by Ada ben Ahaba, one of Rab's earlier pupils, from which it seems that the Exilarch occupied a foremost position among the high dignitaries of the state when he appeared at the court first of the Arsacids and then of the Sassanids. An Arabic writer of the 9th century records the fact that the Exilarch presented a gift of 4,000 dirhams of the Persian feast of Nowruz. Regarding the functions of the Exilarch as the chief tax collector for the Jewish population, there is a curious statement preserved only in the Jerusalem Talmud that once in the time of Hunna, the head of the school of Surah, the Exilarch was commanded to furnish as much grain as would fill a room of 40 square ells. The most important function of the Exilarch was the appointment of the judge. Both Rav and Samuel said that the judge who did not wish to be held personally responsible in case of an error of judgment would have to accept his appointment from the house of the Exilarch. When Rav went from the land of Israel to Nehardea, he was appointed overseer of the market by the Exilarch. The Exilarch had jurisdiction in criminal cases also. Aha B. Jacob, a contemporary of Rav, was commissioned by the Exilarch to take charge of a murder case. The story found in Beaver Kamma 59a is an interesting example of the policies jurisdiction exercised by the followers of the Exilarch in the time of Samuel. From the same time dates and curious dispute regarding the etiquette of precedence among the scholars greeting the Exilarch. The Exilarch had certain privileges regarding real property. It is a especially noteworthy fact that in certain cases the Exilarch judged according to the Persian law. And it was the Exilarch Ukba B. Nehemiah who communicated to the head of the scholar of Pumbedita, Rabbah ben Nahmai, 3 Persian statutes, which Samuel recognized as binding. A synagogal prerogative of the Exilarch was mentioned in the land of Israel as a curiosity. The Torah roll was carried to the Exilarch, while everyone else had to go to the Torah to read from it. This prerogative is referred to also in the account of the installation of the Exilarch in the Arabic period, and gives color to the assumption that the ceremonies as recounted in the document were based in part on usages taken over from the Persian time. The account of the installation of the Exilarch is supplemented by further details in regard to the Exiliate, which are of great historical value. See the following section. Upon the conquest of Iraq, the Caliphate confirmed the authority of the Exilarch on Bustanai, son of Hanani, and the continuation of the governance over the Jewish community. For his political services to the Arab authorities during the Islamic conquest, he was given the daughter of the former Sassanid emperor as a slave. Muslim authorities regarded the office of the Exilarch with a profound respect, as they viewed its incumbent as a direct descendant of the ancient prophet David. The subsequent fragmentation of the authority of the Abbasids resulted in the warning of the authority of the Exilarch beyond the former Abbasid realm. Additionally, the struggle for leadership between the Geonim and the rabbinical academies and Exilarch saw the slow diminishment of centralized power. Rabbinical decentralization favored the Geonim, but remained an office of reverence to which Muslim authorities showed respect. The following is a translation of a portion of an account of an exilarchy in the Arabic period, written by Nathan Babli in the early 10th century and included in Abraham Zakutu's Yuhassin and in Neubauer's Medieval Jewish Chronicles. And I just find this name Neubauer so interesting because we have the Rothschild Bauer family. The member of the two academies, Sura and Pembedita, led by two heads, the Geonim, as well as the leaders of the community, assembled in the house of an especially prominent man before the Sabbath, on which the installation of the Exilarch is to take place. The first homage is paid on Thursday in the synagogue, the event being announced by trumpets, and everyone sends presents to the Exilarch according to his means. The leaders of the community and the wealthy send handsome garments, jewelry, and gold and silver vessels. On Thursday and Friday, the Exilarch gives great banquets. On the morning of the Sabbath, the nobles of the community call for him and accompany him to the synagogue. Here, a wooden platform covered entirely with costly cloth has been erected, under which a picked choir of sweet voices, youths well versed in the liturgy, has been placed. Sounds a bit Roman Catholic. The choir responds to the leader in prayer, who begins the service with Baruch She'amar. After the morning prayer, the Exilarch, who until now has been standing in a covered place, appears. The whole congregation rises and remains standing until he has taken his place on the platform, and the two Geonim, the one from Surah preceding, have taken seats to his right and left, each making an obeisance. A costly canopy has been erected over the seat of the Exilarch. Then the leader in prayer steps in front of the platform, and in a low voice audible only to those close by and accompanied by the Amen of the choir, addresses the Exilarch with the benediction prepared long beforehand. Then the Exilarch delivers a sermon on the text of the week, or commissions the Gaon of Surah to do so. After the discourse, the leader in prayer recites the Kaddish, and he reaches the word during your life and in your days. He adds the words, and during the life of our prince, the Exilarch. After the Kaddish, he blesses the Exilarch, the two heads of the schools, and the several provinces that contribute to the support of the academies. In regards with Nathan Babli's edition, according to the income of the functions of the Exilarch, which refers, however, only to the time of the narrator, it may be noted that he received taxes amounting altogether to 700 gold denarii a year, chiefly from the provinces Naharon, Farsistan, and Holwan. The Muslim author of the 9th century Al-Jahiz, who has been referred to above, makes special mention of the shofar, the wind instrument which was used when the Exilarch excommunicated anyone. The punishment of excommunication is the only ecclesiastical power the Exilarch of the Jews and the Catholicos of the Christians may pronounce, for they are deprived of the right of inflicting punishment by imprisonment or flogging. Another Muslim author reports a conversation that took place in the 8th century between a follower of Islam and the Exilarch, in which the latter boasted, 70 generations have passed between me and King David, yet the Jews still recognize the prerogatives of my royal descent and regard it as their duty to protect me. But you have slain the grandson of Hussein of your prophet. After one single generation, the son of a previous Exilarch said to another Muslim author, I formerly never rode by Kabbalah, the place where Hussein was martyred, without spurring on my horse, for an old tradition said that on this spot the descendant of a prophet would be killed. Only since Hussein has been slain there and the prophecy has thus been fulfilled do I pass leisurely by the place. This last story indicates that the Exilarch had, by the Arab period, become the subject of Muslim legend. That the person of the Exilarch was familiar to Muslim circles is also shown by the fact that the Rabbinite Jews were called Jaluti, that is, those belonging to the Exilarch, in contradistinction to the Karaites. In the first quarter of the 11th century, not long before the extinction of the Exilarchate, Ibn Hazm made the following remark in regard to the dignity. The Ras al-Jalut has no power whatever over the Jews or over other persons. He has merely a title which is attached neither authority nor prerogatives of any kind. To this day, the Exilarchs are still mentioned in the Sabbath services of the Ashkenazi ritual, the Aramaic prayer Yekum Purakan, which was used once in Babylon in pronouncing the blessing upon the leaders there, including the Resh Galwata. The Exilarchs is still recited in most synagogues. The Jews of the Sephardic ritual have not preserved this anachronism, nor was it retained in most of the Reformed synagogues. So, according to the legend, the Makir of Narbonne, or Narbonne, was a Babylonian Jewish scholar and later the supposed leader of the Jewish community of Narbonne in a region which at the time was called Septimania at the end of the 8th century. According to tradition preserved by Abraham ibn Daud in his Sefer HaQabbalah, written about 1161, Makir was a descendant of the house of David. Ibn Daud wrote, then King Charles sent to the king of Baghdad, Caliph, requesting that he dispatch one of his Jews of the seed of the royal house of David. He hearkened and sent him one from there, a magnate and sage, Rabbi Makir by name, and Charles settled him in Narbonne, the capital city, and planted him there, and gave him a great possession. There at the time he captured it from the Ishmaelites, and he, Makir, took the wife, a woman from among the magnates of the town, and the king made him a nobleman, and designed out of love for Makir good statutes for the benefit of all Jews dwelling in the city, as is written and sealed in the Latin Charter, and the seal of the king therein bears the name of Carolus, and it is in their possession at the present time. The Prince Makir became chieftain there. He and his descendants were close interrelated with the king and all his descendants. Whatever Makir's Babylonian origins claimed by his descendants, the relation between Makir and Charlemagne is legendary. The more famous king substituting for the father Pepin, the king of the Franks, who, in order to enlist the Jews of Narbonne in his efforts to keep the Umayyad Saracens at bay, granted wide-ranging powers in return for the surrender of Moorish Narbonne to him in 759. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm going to add it here, that in around the 1300s that the Pope was moved from Rome to France, and at that time was set up in the city of Avignon. and Avignon was in the province of Septimania and near Narbonne. So here it says that the popes were in Avignon from 1309 to 1377. In short, the influence of the French government resulted in the movement of the papal headquarters from Rome to Avignon, and that's from the Catholic.com. And it says from 1309 to 1377, Rome was no longer the center of papacy. Instead, it was relocated to the French city of Avignon. The Annals of Anian and the Chronicles of Marseille both attribute this action to the Gothic leader of Narbonne, rising up and massacring the saccharine garrison. Pepin, with his son Carloman and Charles, redeemed this pledge in 768, granting to Macaire and his heirs extensive lands, an act that called forth an unavailing protest from Pope Stephen III. In 791, Charlemagne confirmed the status of the Jewish principate and made the title of Nassau permanent. Nassau is the title meaning prince in biblical Hebrew. The Macaire family enjoyed for centuries many privileges, and that its members bore the title of Nassau. Benjamin of Toledo, who visited Narbonne in 1165. Speaking of the exalted position occupied by the descendants of Macaire, and royal letters of 1364 also recorded the existence of the Rex Judaeorum, king of the Jews at Narbonne. The place of residence of the Macaire family at Narbonne was designated in official documents as Cortada Regis Judorum. Beni Macaire and the Carolingian dynasty. Arthur Zuckerman maintains that Macaire was actually identical with Natrono ben Habib, an Exilarch deposed and exiled in the dispute between two branches of the family of Bostonite. In the late 8th century, Zuckerman further identified Macaire Natroni with the Margario, Count of Narbonne, actually Viscount, and in turn with the Aimeri de Narbonne, who lived in the 12th century, but whom heroic poetry makes father of William Gallone, died in 813. This William was subject of at least 6 major epic poems composed before the era of the Crusades, including Wilhelm by Wolfram von Eschenbach, who also, in another work, was a chronicler of the search of the Grail. Now, I've brought the Grail up before related to Nabatea, and we know that King Herod's family came from Nabatea, and I believe that the Babylonian Exilarchs were, in fact, the Radonites, and that's why they had such a strong presence in the Rhone region of France. I think that they mixed with the Edomites, as we know that King Herod's father was an Edomite. His mother was also a Nabatean princess. I think that Nabatea, or Petra of Nabatea, was a trading city of these Nabateans of Iraq. And I think that the Nabateans of Iraq were one and the same with the Radonites. Now, I think that these Exilarch were rulers of the Babylonian Jews who were the merchants of the earth. And they were the whore of Babylon. We have the depiction of the woman or the church. The woman is Israel, and she's the whore of Babylon. So she's whoring with this Babylonian system and these Babylonian people, as the merchants with the merchants, and this king of David is taking the taxes and taking the wealth of the merchant system, and she's decked in jewels and red and purple, red and scarlet, and drinking the blood of the martyrs in her cup. And we know that the martyrs were the 144,000, or the remnant of Israel. They were the apostles and the early Christians, the martyrs of Rome. And we have a lot of people associating the Whore of Babylon with the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't deny that. I actually have a suspicion that the Roman Catholic Church was actually started by the priesthood of these Exilarchs and out of when Judea fell. It's just a hunch of mine that I want to start researching. But we can find in historical evidence that is just lately coming out that the Exilarchs were almost certainly linked to the establishment of Islam. And the fact that they were linked to the establishment of Islam also shows that they were linked to the establishment of the Roman Catholic Church. And the reason I say this is because we know that the Roman Catholic Church, according to the ex-Jesuit Ribera, in the information that he found in the Vatican, said that the Roman Catholics actually started Islam. So there's proof that the Exilarch were involved with the beginnings of Islam. So we can't have both. If they're involved with the beginnings of Islam and so was the Roman Catholic Church, then they're also involved with the Roman Catholic Church somehow. We can see that it was a Jewish banker that funded the Crusades. There was a lot of Knights Templars or knights that went on crusade and promoted this agenda of retaking Jerusalem for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And we had a lot of these early descendants of people like Charlemagne, these lords of France and England, crusading for the Holy Land. And this was an early, as I like to say, the First and Second World War were basically a neo-crusade. So the Crusades were, for that time, what we know as World War I and World War II and World War III, which were proposed by Albert Pike. And it was to establish this Kingdom of Israel, which seems to be so important to these people. They were doing it back in the Crusades. They were trying to take this region, and I believe it's because it's so important to them to hold this portion of land because they believe that they are to inherit the earth. And if they can't inherit or hold this piece of land, they can't inherit the earth. And they get the notion that they inherit the earth because they believe that they are the descendants of Jacob and Abraham, which technically they are, but I believe that they're also intermarried with Edom, as it shows in the Revelation 12, that it's the dragon, the Babylonian dragon, because the god of Babylon was the dragon. There's three people who are called the dragon in the Old Testament, and that's the Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of Assyria, and the king of Babylon. And the kings of Babylon worshipped a god that rode a dragon. It says in Malachi that Esau's inheritance would go to the dragons of the wilderness. And I think the woman who is the whore, who is these Exilarchs riding the beast in the wilderness, is the leftover portion of the tribe of Judah that were exiled in Babylon. It also says in Acts that this leftover people or these exiles to Babylon took with them to Babylon their star of Remphan or Raphan. So they were worshipping a false god, and they were exiled because of their corruption and their false god worship. They were not righteous people, and many times throughout history, most of the Israelites were not righteous people. They're still not righteous people. I think they are mixed in with Edomites and Babylonians and Persians, just like the story of Esther. So Esther, who was put on a pedestal, married a Persian king against Mosaic laws, but they have a Talmudic belief that they are still considered parts of the tribes of Israel so long as their mothers were of the tribe of Judah. And this is what these people did. They married their daughters into these kings of the earth, and they still considered themselves descendants of the house of David because their daughters were Jews. It's the historical William I, Count of Toulouse, led Frankish forces at the fall of Barcelona in 803. The account of the campaign of Ermold Niger's Latin poem dates the events as Zuckerman says according to the Jewish calendar, and portrays William again according to Zuckerman's interpretation as an observant Jew. Count William was actually the son of the Frankish Count Theodoric, and in 806 became a monk. In another identification, Zuckerman concludes that Theodoric was none other than Makia, and that the well-documented descendant of Theodoric embodied a dynasty of Franco-Judaic kings of Narbonne, representing the union of the lineage of the Exilarchs with the Carolingians. However, this underlying chain of identification has been shown to be flawed, a negative opinion shared by other scholars. While the broader suggestions of Jewish principalities in southern France have likewise been disputed, Zuckerman's use of the source of analytical approach have also been criticized. Now, they have been criticized, but it's at this time we see all of these kings of Frankish kings using the line of David on their heraldry. And we have all the Israelite symbology being used in their heraldry. And we have the British Israelite or Christian Zionist belief that a king of David will always remain on the throne of David. And we have the kings of Britain being called the kings of the line of David. And I believe that this is where they get the idea that they are the line of King David, and it's the line of King David out of Babylon. So according to the information, Makir ibn Habibi al-Naboni Nasi, or the Exilarch of Narbonne, founded a Talmudic school in Nabi in Septimania, France. So according to this information here, it says the Makir family enjoyed for centuries many privileges, and that its members bore the title of Nasi or Prince. Benjamin of Toledo, who visited Narbonne in 1165, speaks of the exalted position occupied by the descendants of Makir and the royal letters of 1364. Also recorded the existence of a Rex Judorum at Narbonne. The place of residence of the Makir family at Narbonne was designated in official documents as Cortada Regis Judorum. Makir is said to have founded a Talmudic school which vied in greatness with those of Babylonia, and which attracted pupils from many distant points. Okay, so this is in France, where the Knights Templar started. Now, Makir of France was alive in 725 to 793, way before the Crusades. So here we have a website, the Templars, the Secrets of the Kabbalah. Now, I'm just grabbing any website because the basic fundamental story of the Templars were that they were sent to protect the knights traveling to the Holy Land in Crusade. And they set up on the Temple Mount and basically started digging for esoteric Kabbalistic artifacts. So it says, how do the Templars fit into all of this? Well, according to some, they were set up to protect pilgrims. Forget all that nonsense. That was a cover for their true purpose. They grabbed a spot on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as their headquarters because Indiana Jones, they were after a very big prize. And off they went digging for the Kabbalah underneath their own feet. Well, they're not going to find the Kabbalah in this, maybe Solomon's temple, but evidence that they discovered the Kabbalah was their effective rejection of Christianity. Well, I don't think they were ever really Christian. And what is Christian? Roman Catholicism is not Christian, it's Babylonian. And adoption of magical and mystical symbols and beliefs. Look at the weird imagery you find in Templar churches, like pentagrams, for example. Having got the secret, they set about destroying all of those through Crusade who might also have knowledge of the Kabbalah. The Templars wanted to be the only force that truly understood this magic. So did the Templars really find the Kabbalah? There is no doubt Kabbalism does pop up with vigor in Europe in the Middle Ages, mainly among Jews living in provinces in modern France and, more importantly, Muslim-ruled Spain and Portugal. Karen Armstrong, in her book The Battle for God, argues that Jews in Spain turned to Kabbalism as their situation grew steadily worse at the hands of invading Christian forces that eventually took the entire Iberian Peninsula and drove many Jews to Morocco. In effect, Jews turned to magic as their real earthly power, and influence diminished. It was a belief system based on utter despair. Now, this is total gobbledygook, because here we have the Kabbalah coming from Babylon, and that the Makir of Nabon setting up a Talmudic school in the years 700 AD with Pepin the Great and Charlemagne, and that he intermarried with these particular families. And by the time of the Crusades, which was like 1200s, these knights and families would have been deep into Kabbalistic teachings in an occulted religion that run alongside Roman Catholicism. I think that the whole premise for the Crusades being funded by the Pierre Leone Jewish banking family of Pope Urban, and the fact that all of these knights were related and taught possibly out of these Talmudic schools in France, they had the idea that they wanted to take the Holy Land. As in the early 20th century, we had the Christian Zionist and British Israelite movement, which took 400 years to get established, to convince Western people that they needed to crusade and take back the Holy Land for what we have today as the modern state of Israel. So I'm going to leave it there and make this video 2 parts, because I have some more information on how the Exilarch were involved with the establishment of the religion of Islam. But not only that, some really interesting information that shows that perhaps the Exilarch were also what we know from the Bible as the Pharisees, and that the Pharisaical priesthood started the rabbinical schools of Babylon and were the predecessor to the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, which is Kabbalah-based Babylonian mystery religion. So if these Pharisees were behind the establishment of Islam via the Exilarchs, and that we know that the Roman Catholic Church was involved in the establishment of Islam, then it's reasonable to say that perhaps the Pharisees were the people behind starting the Roman Catholic Church. Thanks for listening, everyone.